the subject itself, so that's nice to know. At least it's triggered some thought. It's a controversial subject, so to say, because a lot of it lies unexplored, but at the same time it is one of the most exciting aspects of psychology as it is today. Do we remember the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? That little novella that was published, I think it's almost 100 years old by now. Yeah? Okay. There was this little novel which was also converted into a film about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The setting is in the Victorian times in England, and of course it's a fictional story, but at the same time it is now used very often in psychological literature in terms of as almost a real depiction of the concept of the persona and the shadow. The story is about, to give you a quick summary, the story is about this very typical, what we would call a good doctor, Dr. Jekyll, who's very nice, who's very charitable, very good to his patient, very nice at his work, and overall a very respectable citizen. And he's established himself very well in his practice, and in general he's looked up to in society. He's in the setting of the story, he's somewhere in his probably in his middle age, or 40, 50 kind of an age, although the age is not specified. And suddenly somewhere towards the middle of the story, people start noticing in his circle, so to say, a character, a rather dark character called Mr. Hyde. Okay? Now Mr. Hyde is not seen with, but seen in association with Dr. Jekyll very often. And people see Mr. Hyde coming in and out of the house of Dr. Jekyll. Over a period of time they learn that Dr. Jekyll has for some reason turned over his will to Mr. Hyde. So he's relegated all his property and things to Mr. Hyde, and which people in Dr. Jekyll's circle are a little concerned about who is the stranger and why the need to really do all of this. After a while, people start noticing things like Mr. Hyde starting to be very mean, very vicious at times. There's one point in time where one night there is a person in the vicinity who notices that Mr. Hyde walks out at night, actually tramples a girl walking on the street, beats her up, and then goes back into Dr. Jekyll's house. And then the next morning there is a check which comes from Dr. Jekyll, signed by Dr. Jekyll, which goes to this girl's family saying that this is for the damage caused to the girl. So as a charitable thing from Dr. Jekyll, this is a compensation for the girl, and he offers to treat her as well if necessary. So these kind of events continue, and after a period of time there comes a point where this Mr. Hyde murders a person. So the kind of activities that are taken up by Mr. Hyde keep increasing in terms of viciousness, and he eventually murders a person, which is actually witnessed by one of Jekyll's servants. And very cold-blooded murder, he's not really bothered by it, he doesn't really feel guilty. Again, he's seen going back to Dr. Jekyll's house after the murder and being very calm and cool about it. After this episode, for some reason, people try contacting, his friends try contacting Dr. Jekyll, and he is not accessible. Servants say that he says that he wants to be secluded in his lab. He's locked himself up in a room in the house and is very uncommunicative. He doesn't want anyone else there. At the same time, there are a couple of letters which are found, correspondences from Hyde, and his old friends try and match it up, and they realize there's some similarity in the handwriting with Dr. Jekyll, but at the same time it's not really the same. Eventually they try getting him out of the room, it's not done, and after a few weeks they actually break into the room and find Hyde hanging, hung to death, it's obviously a case of suicide, and there is a note which again is in that handwriting which could be Jekyll or Hyde, in which Jekyll claims that it was very difficult for Jekyll to go back, Jekyll to come back, and therefore Hyde had to be killed. And then when they investigate back, there is this entire story of how Dr. Jekyll, apparently a few years ago, discovered aspects of himself that he did not like. And now he has the self-image, Dr. Jekyll had the self-image of being a very nice, charitable, social person, and he discovered that there were feelings that he had about wanting to be violent or wanting to be sometimes plain rude, not even necessarily violent, but he could not stand those feelings, and he had this thing about saying, how can I have this kind of a feeling? And therefore in his lab, being a doctor and having chemical knowledge, he tries to invent a serum, a chemical, which according to him would suppress that aspect of him. Now in that process of suppression, he keeps taking more and more of that serum, and in the process obviously gets immune to it to a degree where it gets the suppression is so high that the power that is given to the Hyde character, which is really Jekyll in the bad form, is so huge that the doctor needs more and more serum for Jekyll to come back, and then in the process Hyde consumes Jekyll. So it's eventually the same character, what we would now talk of as a case of split personality coming out. Dual personality, the split personality. Now this story helps us understand the concept of what we would call the shadow. Okay. All of us have a shadow because all of us have a persona. Okay. Now the persona, or what we would in regular terms call the personality, each of us have a personality, right? The persona is an aspect of us that we give light to, in literal terms, in the sense we try and cultivate a personality, right? For example, we are taught in school to, let's say, be honest, do good things, speak well to people, right? So those are things that we give light to, in the sense that we make an effort, we invest our energy in developing, and all of us try and develop for reasons of our own or due to social pressure. We develop various aspects of our personality, like we develop, let's say, a quality like honesty or truthfulness. We may develop our creativity, our artistic skills. We may develop, let's say, a certain kind of inclination towards a hobby or a profession. And there are various aspects that we very actively develop. So those constitute our persona. Right? Now what is not given light to is the shadow. Right? Which means, in theory, we encompass everything, the good and the bad, which means if we are honest, dishonesty is very much an aspect of us which we have not chosen to give light to. Right? So there are aspects which which are in balance, in the sense, let's say for example, if you're honest in general, it doesn't mean dishonesty is always in the shadow. It could also sometimes be something that we embrace and say, yes, at times I do say white lies, so it's okay, dishonesty is in me and I'm fine with it. Right? So it's not that every quality that's not expressed is in the shadow, but what is in the shadow is something that is actively repressed. Okay. Another, if you have to look in terms of the representation of shadow in the media, it is, for example, Batman and Joker. That's a very recent thing. The comic series, of course, and plus the movie which brought it out very beautifully. Yeah, the Batman and the Joker, Heath Ledger playing the Joker. And at the end of it, there is that one point where they say, you know, we can't kill each other, because if one has to kill the other, they have to kill themselves, because it's a part of the other. Batman is what you would call the persona and Joker is the shadow. Now, how do we discover our own shadows, and why should we discover it in the first place? Let's start with a quick exercise, and then I'll come back to why and how. Think about the person that you hate, or let's say if not hate, at least dislike the most. It could be a person in your circle like friends or family, or it could be just a person that you know of, somebody that you've seen somewhere, or maybe a famous person, a politician, an actor, a film star, somebody. Think of a person that you really dislike, really hate, and try and pick one person. Okay, you don't have to share, so it's all right, just pick it up. No, you don't have to have many, just one is enough. Okay, it could be intense dislike, doesn't have to be hate. Okay. Now, think about the characteristics of this person that makes you have those feelings of dislike or hate. Think about it in as much detail in terms of what is the feeling that's being stirred up in you, what do you feel like doing to the person? What characteristics disturb you? If you had to come face to face with this person in this moment, what would you want to do to that person? There could be many. You may want to identify their characteristics anyway. If there are many people, try and figure out, is there a distinction in what you dislike? Not so much degree will also help, but also the distinction. Do you think there are similar characteristics all across, or is there a dislike for different reasons? Try and identify as much in detail the characteristic, the quality, the feature that you don't like. Backbite, as in hypocrisy, okay. Identified?
Pretending as a or
okay.
Most of the quality we don't like of ourselves.
No, which is the whole idea of a shadow. So the qualities that you've identified. Now, Jungian as in Carl Jung was a very famous psychologist who developed the concept of shadows. Jungian psychologists would say that the characteristics that you've identified now are those that are in your shadows, right? So let's say if I've identified let's say for example, there was this recent politician someone in Hyderabad who said, he made some very inflammatory speech, and let's say I have this very disturbed feeling about saying, no, this person is worthy of hate. Let's say for example, that the characteristic that I have identified of this person is let's say hate speech, openly being violent, verbal violence is what disturbs me, right? So if it's triggering that kind of a reaction that I feel like hating this person, and verbal violence is what is the trigger for me, then that is that aspect which I need to look at. Somewhere there is that aspect in me, and that's something that I need to perhaps go back and embrace. So there is an aspect of verbal violence in me which I am not conscious of, but at the same time it's disturbing me. So if it's reflecting outside of me and disturbing me, then there is something that I need to perhaps address and integrate, and that's why that's in my shadow, right? So what I have given light to, what is in my persona, is being very pleasing, very calm, not being verbally violent, being very courteous to others. So the violence is in my shadow and it's waiting to erupt, and that's why it's causing reaction. If it wasn't disturbing me, it wasn't waiting to erupt, it wasn't as suppressed, then it wouldn't cause a reaction in me, right? So a very easy way of identifying our shadow is to figure out what causes reaction in us, positively and negatively both. But yes, the concept of shadows typically talks in terms of the negative, because those are what we are conditioned to repress. Right? We are conditioned to repress violence, we are conditioned to repress dishonesty. Typically there is a social characteristic there. So therefore, But yes, it's also possible that there are very positive characteristics in the shadow. For example, if you find a person who has very low self-esteem, low self-image, the power is in the shadow, which is a very good characteristic and which ideally needs to be reclaimed. Right? So the shadow can be both good and bad. It's definitely not a dark aspect of us in any case. It's just something that we have chosen not to give light to unconsciously, more likely than not. Okay. Now, so we have individual shadows, and given that we live in a society, there is also a social shadow. So that there would be a family shadow. The families that we live in can have a shadow, which means collectively this group of people tend to repress certain things. There are shadows of countries, there are shadows of the world in general. Okay. And how do we see shadows manifesting? For example, in India, the whole slew of rape cases, right, which is a manifestation of the shadow. The idea of sexuality is so repressed that it's bursting out in a very violent way. That's the shadow showing itself up and saying, give me light. Yeah, it is venting out. So what happens is when the shadow gets repressed and you say that, no, this is not nice, bury it, that's when it's bound to come back in a rather vengeful or an unpleasant format. Right? Or let's say in terms of the violence in general that is there around the world, or if you look at the kind of violence in different pockets of the world. In some places it is violence due to sheer dissatisfaction, material violence. For example, the kind of violence that's coming up of late in the US with, let's say, all those gunning incidences in schools. Yeah? Racism which is coming up in certain pockets of the world. Religious violence coming up in the Middle East, even in India to some degree. So while there is violence, the causes are very different. So the shadows are very different in different parts of the world. So it helps to understand those regions by looking at what aspect is being repressed. Like in India, the whole idea of sexuality is being repressed, which is coming up through these incidences. In the US, the idea of materialism is, so the capitalistic, materialistic society has been given so much of light to that the idea of emotion is repressed, and therefore the incidences of children being killed or random attacks on people without any particular incidences, because somewhere the emotional aspect by itself is in the shadow because the practical aspect is being given a lot of light. Right? So there are various incidences across the world which can tell us a lot about the collective shadow. But of course the collective shadow is not something that can be directly worked on. It has to be started with the individual persona and the shadow, and therefore it's a quest that has to begin at the personal level and not at the collective level. Eventually, of course, the personal conscious will impact the collective consciousness, but long process there. Why do we need to work on the shadow? Well, several reasons. One is it helps us have a better acceptance of self. It's much easier in terms of not having internal conflicts, because we say that it's more about embracing all aspects of us and saying, all right, I'm also like that and it's okay. The moment I accept it, I don't want to, it's not repressed, then it doesn't seek expression in some unnatural or violent way. Right? So it's more about embracing oneself. It helps in terms of having more balanced relationships, because whatever is there as a part of the personality is revealed and spoken about, and therefore there are no false expectations, there are no assumptions in the process. There are two ways in which a shadow that is not integrated is manifested typically. When I say shadow is not integrated, it is very deliberately suppressed. Right? So when we say shadow, it doesn't really mean that any aspect of ourselves that's unexplored is a shadow. For example, let's say I have never tried mountaineering or cycling. That doesn't mean that aspect, the adventurous aspect of me, is in the shadow. It's just something that I know of and have not tried. Right? It's something which I consciously or at least subconsciously know of and try to suppress. That is what is pushed into the shadow. Okay. So for example, let's say there are times where if I feel like really violent and wanting to do, maybe wanting to pick up something and throw on the floor, but then something reminds me, mom said never do this, so I will not do this. I'll control, I'll take those deep breaths and try not to express my anger. That goes into my shadow. Then that violence is something that is getting repressed, and yes, I'm suppressing it, but the fact that it's come up and I'm not giving it vent and suppressing it is putting it in my shadow. Now, how do I ensure that I integrate it? And that integration is essential, because if I push it in my shadow, at some point it will take over. At a point of extreme stress or crisis, that violence will come up in a way where I can't control. Right?
There are a lot of things you don't know whether to say or not to say.
Yes.
That's also conscious the shadow. Then you
Yes. Then that assertiveness goes into the shadow.
Right.
So what happens in the process is, when we start literally creating shadows in this way through suppression, there are two ways in which it typically manifests. One is either in terms of feeling subjugated to it, in the sense you feel so heavy under the weight of it. So let's say I'm not able to express myself in a certain environment, office or home. I feel it saps my energy, because I know, oh my God, I have to go to that office again today and face all that politics and still smile at people. That weight is huge in terms of subjugation. It affects my physical health, it will affect our emotional well-being, and it causes huge amounts of stress. Right? So that's one way it typically tends to manifest. The other is in terms of outburst. Right? Outburst in terms of, it typically starts with reaction. So if I find that I'm suppressing my own reactions to some people due to, let's say, political issues or otherwise, then I am bound to be very judgmental about people who do that outside of me. So I know that this is something that I can't do. I am not being assertive. So anytime I see someone in my environment who's not being assertive, I will judge and say, oh, this one is spineless. This one doesn't have any strength. Why can't this person speak up? Right? So somewhere my judgment, which is actually towards me, is reflected outside of me. And therefore I get disturbed by people who tend to reflect that shadow. Yes?
Our normal reaction is fight or flight.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And in today's time, there is a small story.
Go ahead.
There was once one sage and his disciple walking through the forest.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly one tiger came across.
Mm-hmm.
The disciple got very afraid. And he told, his first reaction was to fight.
Mm-hmm.
So that means they can protect themselves.
Okay.
The sage told no, not the second reaction was to fly,
Run away.
So sage again told nothing to do. They just
Stood there
and just meditate.
Okay.
Like it created a calm aura, and the tiger also feels safe.
Yes.
And the tiger went away. And the disciple got very puzzled. What happened actually? The tiger didn't attack us. The sheikh told, if we had fight with the tiger is more powerful. It would have killed us.
Yes.
And if we try to fly, the tiger can
It
run
would have
much
overcome anyway. Yes.
much faster. It can again got us. Like so, which requires somewhere the third response.
Yes.
Not to react.
Yes, the third response, it's not to react, it's to face.
There is a better.
It's to be there in front of the tiger and say, I'm here, choose.
Better. This is story again.
Yes, but it's a beautiful story, yes, I mean, which is,
Conclusion is that tiger and both the disciple and she have a shadow which are only positive.
See, the idea here is about saying something is attacking me. I have a response. The typical choice of response would be to be violent, attack, or to not face it and run away, right? Now, in running away, I'm rejecting the issue, right? In fighting also, I'm rejecting the issue because the message that I'm giving across is, I don't want you, right? Instead, the third response, as he says, is to say, all right, you're here, I'm here, what do we do?
It is a surrender.
Right? It's not so much about passive surrender, right? It's not submission, but it's about saying, yes, I accept you're here. What you're doing is moving from a space of rejection to acceptance and saying, yes, I know you're a tiger, I know what you're capable of, and I still choose to stand here. So it's a very active mechanism and not passive surrender. Which is what typically we need to do with our shadows if we wish to work with shadows. It's a very long drawn process. It's something that it continues throughout your life. It's not a one-step exercise at all. But yes, it's a very fruitful exercise because it brings a lot of completion. It helps us explore aspects of self which could be very positive. It can bring up blocked creativity. It can bring up power in a very positive sense of the term. It can help us overcome a sense of victimhood. It can help us overcome guilt addiction, which is a very common issue. We are more addicted to guilt than we really know of. So all of these are aspects which can be overcome if we work with our shadows. Right? Now, how do we work with our shadow? It's something that is again a long process. I can only what we're doing today is really walking by the banks of a river and saying, yeah, if you step in, you're going to get wet. But how do you wish to step in or not is something that you will have to choose. How do we typically work with shadows? There are several ways. One, firstly, is the idea is to find out what lies in our shadow. How do we find out? One way that we really tried doing here is to find out what triggered a hate reaction in us, what or who, the stuff that we started off with. Right? So that's a good question to ask us, and it helps to really write down extended answers. Right? Who is it that we really hate or dislike, and why? What qualities or features in that person or what actions of that person cause that reaction of hatred or dislike? That's a very good way to start, because if it's triggering that sort of a reaction, then it's certainly a suppressed shadow. Another kind of a question that we can ask is, are there any typical kind of characters that we see in our dreams? A repetitive kind of a dream or a repetitive kind of a character that tends to appear in our dreams, which is contradictory to our self-image, our waking character. That again is a very good clue as to what is the shadow. It's something that contradicts us. If you find that you're a person who's normally, let's say, meek or very quiet, collected, and you find this very outgoing, bold, brash character in the dream, that's a shadow which is talking to you and saying, all right, meet me now. You're not meeting me in the conscious state, so meet me when you're not conscious. Right? So dreams are a very powerful tool to express our shadow. Yet another way of expressing it, for those of you who are inclined to art, just pick up and again, you don't have to be an artist to do it, but pick up some colors and see what comes up. And the colors can give you a clue as to what sort of a thing is getting expressed. One is what color, one is what is it that you have drawn out of it, what is it that you've painted out of it. Does it look pleasant, does it look violent, does it look repulsive? What is it that is, what is seeking expression? That's another thing that you can look at. Yet another way is to simply ask yourself, what is it about me that I really, really, really wish to change? A very simple way, especially in this time period, is what was the New Year resolution you made? Right? That if it's something that you really wish to implement, then there's something in the shadow which is seeking expression there. Right? So these are typically the kind of questions you can ask. It really helps to write down answers, because if you think it through, sometimes things tend to get lost in terms of the detail. It is, yeah, writing is powerful because it's also a self-declaration, right? It's in front of you there. So, but yes, do it at a time when you're not influenced by noise and other people in the environment, because it's about touching a very deep aspect of yourself. So yes.
Why do we need to discover this shadow? Is it to reach to our goal and to achieve whatever we want in our life? What is the purpose to discover this shadow?
The purpose, why do we need to work on our shadow, is to put it very broadly, create emotional balance. Okay? Now, if it's not a very suppressed part of a shadow, if it's something like, let's say, I know I say lies sometimes, and I'm okay with that part of me. I'm not really seeking to be an extremely 100% honest person, and I know I lie sometimes. That's okay. It's a shadow. There is some kind of dishonesty in the shadow, but it's easily dealt with. I don't really need to rake it up and bring it up. But if there is an aspect which I really try to push down, then it's something that has a potential to cause me emotional imbalance, or it can cause internal conflict and stress. Sometimes it can manifest in terms of physical diseases, right? Because there's so much of suppression happening somewhere, and any kind of an emotional suppression is stored as a block in the body, somewhere in the body, whichever is the appropriate organ for that block. Right? So why would we want to rake up shadows, is simply to figure out, is there a great imbalance, and if there is, then it's time to integrate it. See, when we integrate or do work with shadows, we're not talking of saying stop being that. It's about saying, yes, I can also be that, acknowledging it and saying, while I can also be that, it's okay, I'm fine with it, I don't judge that part of me. It's about, let's say for example, I have a fight with somebody and I'm in a murderous rage and I really feel like bashing up that person. Right? In that moment in time, I can either suppress it by saying, no, not right. Right? I've been brought up saying violence is not right, I should not beat up people, or what if others see me doing this and there is a problem to my self-image. Right? Now, in that process, I will suppress my shadow. Instead, if I have to embrace it, it's about saying, okay, this is what I'm feeling, and I'm going to tell the person that, you know what, I really feel like bashing you up, and I choose not to do it, but at the same time I would want to express that emotion. Let me just pick up today's newspaper and tear it apart. You know, it's about saying that violence is okay, and there is a part of me which has the potential to be violent, and I allow myself to express that in a very conscious way. So when I'm doing it in a conscious way, I'm not going up and bashing up that person, but I'm doing a fairly, not harmful act of probably tearing up a piece of paper. But in that process, I'm saying, it's all right, there is an aspect of me that's violent, I embrace it, and therefore it will not seek expression in a way that's beyond my control. If I keep putting it down, then it's possible that it may come up in a way that I can't control it in the future. Yes?
Yeah, actually, the second example is workable. Because first example, many times I have seen myself also cooking. It didn't work.
First example as in not doing anything about it.
Not doing the same, and when the trigger is there, or something is there, unexpected.
Yes.
Actually, it's all burst out.
Yes.
Second way is more healthy also.
Yeah, because it's about saying, yeah, it's okay, I'm capable of violence, I'm capable of rape, I'm capable of murder. Yes, see, because it's important to release that energy. Why does it go into the shadows? Because you're saying, this is not part of me, I don't want to have this, but then you can't reject it because it is an aspect of us. Why the persona and the shadows? Because we are, that's a very basic principle of the universe that we are in. There are polarities, there is a plus and a minus and a 0 and a 1 and masculine and feminine, and therefore the persona and the shadow, there has to be that opposing forces to bring about balance. So therefore, if I am very calm and collected, there is a potential in me to be absolutely imbalanced and angry. Okay, the potential lies there, but it's about saying, okay, the potential is there. If ever it chooses to seek expression, I will give it controlled expression. Right? Instead of not giving it expression at all and saying, no, 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 I'm calm, I'm calm, I'm calm. In that process, the more you dig it deeper, the more it will come out, no, more forcefully it will burst out. So here it's about saying, acknowledging that yes, it's there and I'm fine with it. Right? So it's more of a process of engaging with the shadow, a lot of internal dialogue, and about slowly integrating it. It's about assimilating and saying, all right, there is this aspect of me and there is also the opposite of it. It's fine. Shadows are?
Good aspects.
Yeah, shadows can be good aspects also. Usually not. See, there is always a balance.
Monks and all monks, all these monks and guru people,
Yes.
Stated.
Yes.
according to people, they are very
Spiritual guys.
Yes.
so they don't have any bad thing. So what a shadow reflect.
See, if what you're saying is that, let's say you take a character like a spiritual guru or a monk, the persona is very positive, right? Now, if the persona is positive, the shadow is the negative. But it's a question about, now it's something that the person himself or herself only would know, that how much of that shadow is integrated. They will have shadow, of course. So if the monk is always forgiving and always very nice, always very peaceful, the opposites are in the shadow. Is it integrated? Is something that he or she would know, and it would reflect in terms of action. So yes, it's okay to be it's okay to have feelings of anger or whatever is the opposite of forgiveness. But it's about processing it when the moment comes and saying, okay, I am feeling hurt about this person. Do I choose to forgive because I am taught to forgive? Or do I choose to forgive by acknowledging that yes, I am hurt, and I will perhaps take steps to ensure that I am not hurt in the future. So if that makes it necessary for me to stay away from this kind of a person in the future, I will do it. In that case, the shadow will get assimilated. No, go ahead. Okay. No, not at all. Now, see, what is reflected outside is the persona. So opposite would be the shadow. Okay? So shadows can sometimes also be very positive. So if the person is actually reflecting a lot of anger, if you find, let's say in your vicinity, somebody who's very short-tempered, very angry, the opposites are actually in the shadow, which can be reclaimed. You were saying something.
That's the development of, that's the knowing, the process of knowing your real self, developing your inner sense. Is it related to the shadow?
It has an impact on the shadow, because it brings up the shadow for sure. Any kind of process of inner reflection through a spiritual practice or meditation or sometimes just self-dialogue is getting in touch with the shadow. So yes, it will bring up aspects for consideration. Now after consideration, what you choose to do with it is something that you need to be very aware of. Because sometimes socially we are conditioned to repress it, unfortunately. So that's something we'll have to overcome and say, it's all right, I do feel like this, and let me give it expression. It may not be in a violent way, it may not be about going and killing somebody, but at least vocalizing it and saying, this is what I feel. Because in that vocalizing, you've given it expression, so then it will not stay suppressed. It's about saying, I'm capable of this as well, and that's that. So I'm integrating the shadow into my personality. So it's about, in a sense, removing blind spots. Shadows are things about us that we don't know about. So it's about shedding more light into it so that the shadow is minimized, the more and more of it is in the personality. So the personality is very balanced in the sense that you know that the person has both good and bad and is willing to reveal both good and bad and make a conscious choice. So when you talk of a monk or a person who is very evolved, there are also people who will say, yes, I have both, and at the same time I choose one and not the other. Therefore there is no judgment about the fact that there is some. Why do we hear statements from these people saying, you know, let's forgive and that there is nothing to hold anger about and all of that? That comes from the fact that it's all right. It's in the shadow, and if I've accepted it in my shadow, then it's easy for me to accept it in somebody else also, and that's why they don't get disturbed by what's happening around them. Yes?
How do you match shadow to the mind or soul or the body? How do you match? What it is exactly? Is it soul or is it body?
Well, it's driven by the soul, but yes, we are dealing with it at the mental level, mental and emotional level.
But we are going very deep.
Deep into the personality.
So we are reaching to the soul or what it is?
Eventually, of course, you will. Any work that you do on self, even at the physical level, it is reaching your soul eventually.
Soul in other life.
It's not your soul. It's an aspect of your persona. It's a part of the human form. Shadow is not your soul.
We are not matching the shadow like the soul.
No, not at all. No, not at all. Shadow is very much a part of the human persona. It's a very human trait. It's an extremely human trait. The reason, human specifically, because an animal, for example, wouldn't have a shadow because it doesn't seek to repress. If a dog is angry, it's angry. If it wants to go bite someone, it goes bite someone. It doesn't repress. Right? So the personality and the shadow is assimilated anyway. They don't create shadows. Whereas for us, because of the conditioning, we create shadows. So animals don't have to seek to integrate. We have to seek to integrate. Rule? Well, I'm not too sure of that. That's why, yeah, at least we pretend to be civilized. Yes. So, yeah, morality comes into place, but that's why morality is a dangerous game, because it leads to a lot of suppression. It actually helps to have a sense of personal honesty rather than morality, because morality can sometimes lead to a lot of repression, and when it bursts out in a very bad way, which we are seeing in the society around us.
Actually, most of us, when we are small, like even when we grow up, our response is same, like childlike. We do only one response. If we get something, or we want something, or we don't get, like childhood do. Like I am not able to. When we grow up, like we have better way also to respond
Yes.
to the same thing. We forget,
Yes.
we will take it one way. अगर मिला तो खुश होते, नहीं मिला तो opposite.
Yeah. So, which is a matter of the belief, right? There is a belief system which is built in childhood, and we stay with that belief system, which ideally should be evolved as we grow up. Which is where, again, that can contribute to the shadow. So let's say as a child I've been taught, you don't speak up to elders, right? You don't back answer somebody who's elder to you. So somewhere there is a belief saying, okay, elder to me, there's a script written, no talking back, right? So even if I'm angry at you, even if I logically know that the person is wrong, I can't talk back because the belief says no talking back. Now, as I grow up, I do have a choice to reevaluate and say that, all right, if I do want to present a logical argument to that person, I can do so respectfully. Right? That's a choice that I can make when I grow up, and actually replace that belief and say, it's okay to state the truth in a polite, respectful way without hurting anybody. But if I don't choose it, then I'm building my shadows, because something in me seeks expression and I'm saying no expression because some belief somewhere says that's not done. So yes, our beliefs do contribute to our shadows, for sure.
It means that whatever it's a good desire or the bad desire, you need to express. So there should not be any negative shadows built inside body like that. So what is
See, it's about, yes, giving expression to all aspects of our personality without a sense of judgment about saying good or bad, because if it's there as a part of our personality, it's there, right? There is no point in suppression. For example, I mean, look at all those rape cases in India. The whole idea of sexuality is taboo. right? Sex can't be spoken about, it can't be expressed, it's not something that you talk about in public, it's not something that you share even with close people. So there is so much of suppression of that thing that it is seeking violent expression through rape. That's a collective shadow, right?
They need to speak up.
Yes, so it is all right to express it. If our children were taught through proper sex education to say, yes, it's normal and human and it's a biological function to have sexual feelings and it is okay to speak about it respectfully, then you wouldn't find it being expressed in a violent manner, because somewhere it will be expressed in a very respectful manner to whoever concerned, right? And at the same time, when we say expression, it's not forcing your way into it, but also saying that, okay, this is how I feel, and in that expression it dissipates, that energy dissipates. It's because it's not given expression, it tends to get into something which is very unpleasant. You were saying something. Okay. So, yeah, so we were talking about why engage with the shadow. This is the reason why we engage with the shadow. How do we engage? Step 1 we spoke about, try and find what's in the shadow through asking yourself those questions, things like, who do you hate? What do you dream about? What do you want to really change about yourself? What is it that you admire a lot in somebody else? Right? Anything external which triggers a response, and a very heavy response. Okay, I'm not talking of a general sense of response. Let's say I think Aishwarya Rai is very beautiful. Now that's a general response. It's not causing an emotional reaction in me. Anything that causes a huge emotional surge in me, positively or negatively, is pointing to a shadow. Right? So think about environmental triggers which cause those responses. That's a huge trigger for you to lead into the shadow. The next step is to then start engaging with the shadow, and the more you engage, the process of integration goes deeper. Again, there are several ways to engage with it. A very simple way that you can do through some visualization is, and again I'll only explain the process because it's a very personal process. You will need to do it in your own sacred space and time. But one way of doing it is identify it first, and then when you have some time, sit in whatever is a meditative state for you. Now when I say meditation, not cross-legged, closed eyes, but in a very calm, collected space. If you feel like having music in the background, that's fine. And you can imagine, for example, you can have any visualization, but one very powerful thing that's commonly used is a campfire. To imagine yourself sitting in a campfire, a very nice, cool, collected place, safe place, in which there's a campfire, and invite your shadow to sit with you in that campfire. And then start having a dialogue there. It helps to have your eyes closed and sit in a closed room so that there is no disturbance in the process. Start having a dialogue right from asking your shadow, what's your name? Right? And the names could be, for example, angry so-and-so, or patient so-and-so, or creative so-and-so. It could be, because it's a shadow, right? It's representing some quality. So it might give you some name, or it might give you just a random name, which is fine. Right? So ask for a name, because then it's easier to build that dialogue. And then start having that dialogue largely about saying, where did you come up? When did you come up? In the sense that, what was the incident which put you in the shadow? And you will eventually be guided to a memory of some incident, normally sometime in childhood or even early adulthood, which says, this was when I was born, this was when I was created. Right? So ask the shadow, when were you created? When were you born? Why were you born? Who triggered? Or who influenced you? Who or what? It could be sometimes a situation, it could sometimes be a person that's triggered the birth of the shadow. What message do you have for me? What do you wish me to do for you? Do you want to seek expression in some way? Do you want me to simply accept and leave it at that? Do you want me to perhaps do something, say something to someone else and thus integrate you? Right? What do you want me to do for you? What is the gift you have for me? And trust me, shadows can bring us huge gifts. If they're positive shadows, it's amazing the kind of power that they can bring us. And typically for people who have blocked creativity, it's usually a shadow which is holding all that creativity and saying, I'll not give you this till the time you work on me. Right? So ask the shadow, what is the gift? And trust your responses. Any thought or emotion that comes to mind during this dialogue is really an answer. Don't question that answer. It is something that you need to reflect on. It helps to actually write it down. Note it down. Don't judge it at that point. Don't say, this is so stupid, I'm imagining this. None of that. Just write down whatever comes up. It's fine. And then in your own space and time, reflect on it and see what is it that the shadow is asking you to do. Right? So the kind of questions you would ask is start with the name, ask who is he or she. Normally the shadow appears in the same gender, normally, but don't block it if you find a different gender, different energy, it's fine. It's perhaps the other aspect of yourself. So even as a female, I would have a masculine aspect to me, so the male shadow can also come up. But usually it's in the same form because it's like an alter ego. So be receptive to anything that comes up and ask, who are you? Why were you born? Who triggered your birth? Why do you stay? Why do you stay in the sense, what am I doing that's making you stay and not really come back to me, integrate or reclaimed? Right? There is some behavior in me where I'm consciously or unconsciously suppressing, and that's why this shadow is still alive. So why do you stay? How do I honor you? How do I honor the gift that you have for me? And how do I integrate? Right? So have this extended dialogue. If you want, write out the dialogues, it helps. If you want, record it, speak it out for yourself and record it, whichever way. But it helps to record simply, record in terms of written or voice, simply because at that point in time you don't want to make any judgments. You simply want to record everything that's coming up. And then later sit back and see what is it that you need to actively start doing with it. So sometimes people come up with things like, okay, I need to start painting. I need to start exercising. I need to have a frank talk with this person. Right? It could be absolutely any kind of an answer which is given by the shadow. Trust it and give it a try. Go ahead, do it. And that slowly integrates the shadow back into you. There's no perfect time as such, but then do ensure that it's a time when you're not really disturbed, and please don't do it if you're emotionally disturbed. If you've just had a fight with somebody, don't sit for this exercise because that will influence you. And in that emotionally disturbed state, it's very likely that you will suppress what comes up. So do it in an easy state. There's no particular morning, evening kind of a time. It's not, it's a very personal exercise, so any time is good. Yes, you need a calm, quiet place where you're not disturbed for at least a few minutes while you're having this dialogue. Of course, you don't have to do all of it at the same time. You can find your shadow first, then later have that dialogue, then later process that dialogue. So it's not a one-time exercise. It's something that you'll keep doing. But trust me, it's a hugely liberating process when you start integrating it, because then you access your strengths in various ways. For example, even if I reclaim a shadow that is actually anger, right? That anger can actually be very stimulating in terms of going out, doing something creative out of it. So reclaiming a bad shadow can also be very empowering. I mean, so-called bad shadow. I mean, technically it's not bad, it's just that in our judgment we say it's bad. So there is no there's no danger in reclaiming a shadow. Even if you're reclaiming the shadow of, let's say, even if I reclaim the murderer in me, it's fine. It's an empowering thing which says that, all right, tomorrow if I have to defend myself physically, I know I can do it, and that confidence can help me a lot. That doesn't mean it will make me a murderer tomorrow. It's just that I know I'm empowered, so I know I won't have to run if I am for some reason attacked. I'll be able to face it. So it's a very safe process, but a long one. And yes, a never-ending one in the sense, so long as we have a personality, we will have a shadow. So it's not an exercise that you can stop at any time. Yes?
Actually, you told anger, if we are able to reclaim it. Lot of energy our is going towards that.
It helps to reclaim because
Same energy we can utilize.
yeah. Because the kind of energy and effort we waste in suppressing our anger can actually all be redirected back creatively somewhere else, constructively. So yes, it makes sense to reclaim anger. It makes sense to reclaim all sorts of so-called negative things. You were saying something.
So which disease, which are all diseases are you want to replace?
Practically anything and everything, because
Diabetes is that.
see, most diseases are caused by some kind of block or suppression.
So
So
you say that the people should be aware about this. So instead of taking medicines, they can first do the trial.
no, I wouldn't say replace medicines with it, but it can hugely complement medicines.
Instead of starting, see, diabetic, they should not start immediately medicine. They should not go for that. With this, all this, come up with the emotions.
It can certainly supplement medicines, yes, because it quickens the process so much that you're actually addressing the cause in a way and not the symptom. So if the cause goes, then why the need for medicine? So eventually, yes, it can cure, but yeah, I wouldn't go so much as to say stop medication, because it may really help.
Doctors, they are not going to explain about all this. They
Yes.
just want to start a medicine. They need to be controlled for lifelong. The
Yes.
patients,
Sometimes now there are various disorders, mentally disorders.
Yes.
Doctor prescribes them some medicine. Those thoughts are suppressed by them.
Yes.
Okay. One is a lot of angry, one is a lot of crying nature. The mother and father go with the doctor.
Yes.
Doctor prescribes some medicine, drugs, but that is not the only solution. So what I mean, dealing with all this is the perfect way. Talking to
Yeah, it's a very holistic way because you're addressing the cause and not the symptom.
sometimes
So
there is no balance in this. Someone says that drugs are the important one, and others says that the spirituality is the shadows and all are important.
see, the thing is, the drugs can help in terms of, at least in terms of a palliative cure. It can control symptoms. See, the reason why medicines work is at least the symptoms don't go out of control. So I'm not saying chuck away medicines, but at the same time, it is necessary to address the root cause. So a psychological measure or a spiritual measure can address the root cause and weed it out. Whereas a medicine can only heal the symptom. I mean, unfortunately, the approach of modern medicine is such that it is meant to heal symptoms and not the cause. So yeah, it certainly helps to explore on this path anyway.
I also have some, I'm angry about the system. And you said that sexuality is not talked openly. But why it is not talked openly? It's a must necessity for a student to have an education in his adolescence period. But then why this government is not bringing such reforms and only
So think about the feeling that it's creating in you. Yes. So think about the feeling that it's creating in you and try and integrate it and say that, yes, it's fine, I'm angry. Now here you're very conscious of the anger. Okay, it's not really in the shadow, but what is in the shadow is something you'll have to reclaim. So if you're angry, then where is the calmness? Where is the acceptance of the situation? In reclaiming the acceptance, you will say that, all right, now that I accept the situation as it is, I am empowered to change. Now I'll go and do something about it.
Yeah, I got it. My discussion was not relevant to the shadows.
No, it's possible that there is if there is emotion coming up, it's possible that there is shadow coming up, but the shadow seems to be very positive in this case. The shadow is acceptance, because the personality is reflecting anger. So reclaim that acceptance. Right? So yeah, two-step process. First, find the shadow. Second, start engaging. I just gave you one ritual of a campfire. Fire is more used in the sense of the archetypical cleansing mechanism. So it's more something that purifies and therefore reclaims. But instead of a fire, you can use any nice pleasing visual. It could be sitting by a lake or anything that you think gives you calm. Anything, absolutely anything that which brings you in a state of calm and facilitates a dialogue with the shadow. Right? Absolutely anything will do there. Some people simply start writing. They don't visualize, they simply start writing dialogues with the shadow, which is fine. Whichever way it works for you is good enough. One way in which drama therapy works in terms of shadow is actually playing out, acting out. Imagine the character in front of you and act out a dialogue. So if that acting out means that you want to be violent or you want to be nice, whichever way, act it out when you have that space around you. Shadow? Okay. No, I don't really remember. Okay. So there are several concepts in media which I've actually explored it. But yes, the process works beautifully, but yes, it's a lifelong engagement. But a beautiful engagement because it helps reclaim a lot of our strengths in the process. Right, any questions? All right, thank you very much. It was nice engaging with you.